We bought a second-hand scope from eBay a few months ago. It works well, but the display's quite dim. After doing some investigation, it appears the problem is likely to be the backlight. There are quite a few posts on how to replace it, but it seems to me there ought to be an easier way. Let's have a look and see. You'll need to pull its knobs off. The front panel is held on by two screws, and you need to take the handle off to reach them. Just prise it gently out at one end. The screws on this unit are Torx ones, and they seem to be S15. The panel engages with the tabs that are hiding underneath the folding foot. It does eventually come off if you poke at it carefully for a while. I've only ever seen people pull the whole insides out and then disconnect the entire display module. This is the tube here. There must be a better way. The display panel tucks underneath the lip with the PCB at the right side, and it's retained by these two little latches. So if you very gently spring these, you can lift up the end with the tube and slide it a little way out. This display module is attached to the main board with a printed cable, so it doesn't move far, but it's enough. When others have removed this unit, I've heard them say, "Oh dear, I broke off one of the spring clips." Well, the ones on this dropped off when I lifted up the edge of the display module. They'll be brittle and unsalvageable. I suspect it's a combination of years of heat from the tube and perhaps exposure to UV as the tube grows older and the phosphor becomes less emissive. They'll probably all just break off. The tube is connected to the inverter by these pink and white wires. They're plenty long enough just to cut off. Now we can pull out the tube. There's a rubber end cap and the join is heat shrunk. I bought a new tube from RS. I'd normally try to buy from a smaller UK business, but these are a bit specialised. The old tube is darkened at the ends, which is what happens to them when they get old. The new tube just slides in. Some replacements already have wires and a connector, but then you'd have to dismantle the whole thing to unplug it and somehow open up that rolled edge to wrap around it. When I form ends on glass seals, I tend to hold the wire near the tube so I don't stress the joint. This wire is quite soft. I didn't really need to bother. Let's cut the heat shrink off and see how the original wires were joined. I was half expecting them to be spot welded, but it's a simple overlap solder joint. So far, I've not seen anyone replace the heat shrink, but we have some in various sizes, so we'll replicate the original as far as possible. I don't know why the joint has heat shrink, but it's there for a reason. These tubes are driven from high voltage AC, so it may be important in the double insulation design to reduce the risk of shock if the unit gets wet, or to stop the wire becoming exposed if the joint fails. These wires have a soft insulation which feels like silicone, probably due to the elevated temperature. Before we strip the end, we'll put on the end cap and the heat shrink. Push it right up the wire away from the soldering heat. I'll turn up the iron to a higher temperature because wires that have been subjected to heat for long periods tend not to tin very well, as the surfaces of the strands have become oxidised. It does seem to need a lot more solder than you'd expect. More flux is probably what it needed. Now we'll tin the end of the tube as quickly as we can. I never like heat on glass joints. A simple touch and melt overlap joint as quickly as possible. Now we push the heat shrink over the end of the tube. I obviously can't get a heat gun on that because it'll melt the surrounding plastic, but the tube gets hot, so it'll shrink itself to the right shape after it's bent, which is even better. Now fit the rubber end cap. And repeat for the other end. Nothing can be done about the broken tabs except perhaps a piece of tape. I normally have a roll of high temperature electrical wrapping tape that I use for motor windings, but I seem to have used it all up. Ordinary tape will have to do. Arrange the wires carefully to avoid trapping. There's a spring clip here. It should click into place. This is where people say, let's put it all back together and see if it works. I prefer to see if it works before I put it all back together. Yes, it does. We'll put back the membrane with the push buttons on, and then its panel, screws, knobs and handle. This is better. There's a shaded area on the left side, but that disappeared after half an hour or so. It was there before we changed the tube, so perhaps there was some dampness in the display unit somewhere which affected light transmission. When things aren't used for long periods here in the winter, they do tend to suffer in the cold and damp. All in all, we're very happy with the display quality now. Let us know how you get on in the comments.